There's much about Jorge Maria Bergoglio, the 266th pontiff, Pope Francis, that I really admire. I like his forward style. His when in America, do as the Americans do. While on these shores, when he gave his opening remarks, he quoted the great American thinkers. He referenced the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, and he referenced 20th century American theologians. He referenced Trappist monk Thomas Merton. He referenced the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he referenced a marvelous and interesting American woman, socialist, pacifist, and Catholic convert Dorothy Day. And, you know, when everyone else rode up in huge limousines and got out with trumpets blaring out of their big, huge cars, the car that the Pope carries in Shepherd One, here comes the smiling Pope, the people's Pope, in a Fiat. A little Fiat. There he was, stuffed in with his bodyguards. Now, Francis is no small man. You can tell he likes his pasta. And those bodyguards also look pretty husky. If Francis wasn't the pontiff, the Holy Father, it would almost look like he and they were getting out of a clown car. One after another, they kept popping out of that little car. But be sure, Francis is no clown. Francis is canny. Pope Francis is very, very smart. He works very hard to position the papacy not as a sovereign looking down, but as a priest of the people looking back up. When the one who has the charge of the entire Catholic Church asks the high and the low, the old and the young, to pray for him, Francis positions himself so that when we gaze at him, we see him looking in the same direction as ourselves, to God for guidance. Francis knows that the Catholic Church, and all of Christianity for that matter, has a lot to answer to and a lot to answer for. If Francis can be seen as on his knees petitioning God along with his constituency, instead of so much answering to his constituency on behalf of God, he personally sidesteps much of the criticism of the part of God's church which he leads. Don't be fooled. Francis is a brilliant strategist. Francis is a brilliant theologian. Our postmodern 21st century world constantly scrutinizes its political leaders and its holy leaders looking for missteps. Nothing has changed. As you know, the Pope he's still doing damage control for some secret meetings with a certain young lady that may or may not happen. In addition, our political leaders and our holy leaders constantly scrutinize each other. I am the way to God. No, no, we are the way to God. No, no, listen to us. On and on and on. It was Steve Jobs who said, if we don't stop this infighting, we will be destroyed from without. Is that the reason people are taking up arms in churches and on college campuses against Christians? Because we can't stop the infighting. In this passage that Jill read to us today, the Pharisees, who were themselves a religious sect of Judaism, constantly followed their fellow Jew, Jesus, always seeking to test him, always trying to find a way to discredit him, to marginalize him, and to eventually kill him. Like the writer of the psalm that we read earlier in the service, they believed that their understanding of the law and right living was the way to God. They were not comfortable with Jesus preaching love, forgiveness, and mercy. That wasn't law. So, The Pharisees connived to ask alleged religious questions that were really political questions. And you see, the beauty and the challenge of this plan is this. Political questions asked and having to be answered in public there is no answer for political questions that anybody can give that will fully satisfy everybody. Have you been watching the debates? There is no fully satisfactory answer that anybody can give. The Pharisees might have said, Jesus, what are your views on abortion? Jesus, what are your views on Planned Parenthood? Jesus, what are your views on same-sex marriage? In this instance, Jesus, what are your views on divorce? Jesus, is it legal for a man to divorce or put away his wife? It was never about divorce. The questions were about discrediting Jesus. And Jesus, because he was perfectly centered in God, was able to turn every political ploy into a teaching moment on love, the likes of which the world has never seen before or since. Jesus took their own question and turned it, as he always did, into opportunity, into a way out even for them. It is what we are called to do, by the way. Jesus answered them saying, yes, Moses allowed divorce because of your hardness of heart. But then Jesus said, men and women, when they are joined together, they become one flesh. What that means is that in a situation when hearts harden and people can no longer stay in relationship, a woman has as much right as a man does to initiate whatever she needs to restore herself to wholeness. Men are not the only ones who can initiate divorce. Is divorce sad? Yes. Is divorce tragic? Yes. But living a life of desperation and danger in a toxic relationship is even worse. Women and men stand equal before God, not men first. Spouses stand equally before God. God will judge all equally with justice and mercy. It has been difficult for me to hear the people's pope, my fellow theologian, Francis, say many things before, during, and since his visit to America. Here is one of the things with which I particularly struggle. Francis said, women have many things that they can do in the church and for the church. But then he said, but we will sacrifice none of our apostolic authority, which translates our authority as men, to allow them to stand on equal footing with us. 1,680 years before Jesus' time, Miriam, Moses' sister, saved Moses' life by putting him in a basket and floating him down the river. Later, she stood with Moses as an equal celebrant and proclaimed God's power to God's people when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. Even in this patriarchal canon, which we call the Bible, women have time after time managed to step forward and be spiritual leaders among God's people. Francis. During the passing of the peace, I took an extra pastoral privilege to sneak back and get another look at that cute baby back there. And one of the things that touched me during the Pope's time here in the United States is that for all the pomp and circumstance that swirled around the Pope as he moved through Washington, D.C., New York, and Philadelphia, and wherever else he was, the act that continually made me catch my breath the act that moved me to tears time and time again was as he processed through the crowd whenever there was a differently abled child, a child in a wheelchair. Did you see what he did? He stopped and held that child, or kissed that child, or blessed that child. Every one of those children that I could see that he could get to in his path. The number one Catholic, the Holy Father, stopped to pray and bless the little children who, through no fault of their own, were facing physical challenges. As Jesus taught and held off the Pharisees a little while longer, as he talked about the rights of women in the presence of his own disciples whose eyes and whose minds glazed over because they couldn't understand the depth of his meaning, people were bringing their children to Jesus so that as Jesus moved by in procession, he might bless them. He might heal them. You know, a few weeks ago I talked about Jesus just taking children off of the street and blessing them. In this situation, people were bringing their children to Jesus for blessing and healing. And the disciples, seeking to be the brokers of apostolic authority, stepped in to stop the people from bringing their children close so they might receive a Jesus touch. The disciples thought that Jesus was too important to be bothered by a bunch of lowly children, children who were even less thought of than women. When Jesus saw this, he turned his frustration with the Pharisees to outright anger toward those disciples who followed so close to him, but followed him without true understanding. Jesus said, "Learn, disciples, get over your need for power, curb your instincts to control." The New Revised Version of the story, which Jill read in your hearing today, says, "Let the little children come unto me." But the King James Version, which we don't quote very much, says, "Rein yourselves in, hold yourselves, your heavy-handed impulses back, curb your controlling instinct, your need for micromanagement, your apostolic authority to rearrange the world in your favor." It says, "You suffer. Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for this is the nature of the kingdom of God." And then Jesus warned them, and if you don't follow their example, by that he means the little children, and come yourselves as little innocent children, instead of being power brokers with entitlement issues, the kingdom will pass you by. On this 82nd observation of World Communion Sunday, you and I come not as anyone who has a right or a privilege because of anything we have done to this table. We come still standing with the oppressed. We come still standing as the oppressed. We come as little children, and not so little children, seeking in spite of everything and everything that we have done, whether we are differently abled, whether we are of different orientation, whether we are female, whether we are male, not to be separated on the basis of which ones of us will bear the mantle of apostolic authority, whatever that is, but simply as the children that we are, hoping that someone will curb their impulses and suffer all of us little children, some of us 90 years young, to come to the Jesus that we love and adore, in order to one more time be taken up in the arms of the Master, the one who hosts this table, and simply, once again,